wholeness comes from the inside out.
When we're living congruently with our values, there's happiness because there is that sense of wholeness.
Wholeness is when the way of your being matches the truth of your being.
These next few podcasts are an attempt to talk a little bit about my theory of the mental, emotional, and spiritual bodies and how they communicate within the physical sensations we experience. I'm going to put a link in the podcast notes where you can experience a meditation and really get familiar and experience your mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual bodies. So be sure and check that out. It's free. In early 2021, I took each body and focused on it for the whole month in my video library at michellewingle.com/thrive-free. There's a lot more there, and you can access all of that for free. I'll put a link in the notes. And I've included a movie review for each body to help teach principles kind of in a fun way. So that's kind of fun, but spoiler alert. I wanted to have these ideas in place as I begin a new batch of podcasts based on different modalities within holistic or wellness practices. I have found the distinction between our mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical experiences to be useful in finding a modality that is right for you. The mental body is the logical part of us, as well as our creative and expansive understanding of things. Jill Bolte Taylor's famous TED Talk explains these two sides of the mind, creative and expansive, from this perspective of being in each side independently as a result of a stroke. She refers to these sides as the left side and the right side, but scientists have found that the brain is much more connected than that. I still might refer to them as right and left every now and then. There are two distinct characteristics of the mental process. And although the brain is the life center of the mental body, it's not just simply the brain. The mental body is about more than that. The brain regulates the body's processes such as digestion and breathing and heart rate. When I speak of the mental body, I'm referring to how we think, how we mental things. Those of us who feel more comfortable on the left side of the brain will value logic and may think more linearly. Those who process life more through creativity and vast possibilities are right side thinkers. Both of these processes are a function of our mental body, that part of us that thinks versus the parts that feel, whether that feeling is an emotion or a physical sensation or feeling connection and meaning to something beyond ourselves. The mental body is made up of the components that created the way we see things. Whether that is correct or factual or not, it doesn't matter. Our brain and nervous systems, different from the mental body, it's their number one job is to track things that provide a positive reward and what things produce a negative effect. And the latter is the top priority. It wants to avoid the negative. Some of you may know my dog Sully. When he was young, we enrolled him in a puppy training course, and the first thing we learned was how to steer him in the right direction by either withholding a reward or offering him one. In this case, it was a treat, and this method was very effective for dogs. We as humans kind of have the same reward system built into us, but our brain uses chemicals to steer us, or you could even say train us. When things are going well, dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin feels superb in our body. We are feeling great. When the brain wants our attention fast because it senses some kind of emotions, whether mental or physical danger, then adrenaline, cortisol, and norepinephrine push us into action. Sometimes it's just the slightest whiff of danger, and these chemicals come rushing in. And the brain has the body's senses on alert for any sights, smells, sounds, anything close to a situation that resulted from a negative effect in the past. This process is the physical function of the brain. It's not a thought process. It's an automatic response. The mental body is the part that comes in and identifies these physical sensations produced by the chemicals and creates thoughts and beliefs about them. If we use our mental body as a tool, we can do detective work to find out which action produces what reaction, and can use logic or creativity, left and right side, to help reframe the situation. This is what we call mindfulness. We are meant to be mindfulness champions. Here's an example. For about 12 years after getting married and having 4 children, I could not get below 150 pounds. I'm 5'7", 5'8", and had always been a long, slender girl. And I was not necessarily obese, and my weight would fluctuate, but my weight would rise and fall, but never below 150 pounds. And just a side pause and acknowledge that 150 to some will feel like Jabba the Hutt. That's their worst nightmare. While others, 150 is below their dream goal. And that only proves my point. To make a long story short, one day I could see this belief I had that told me that since I was a mom and birthed 4 children, I could not be hot and sexy again without living on like lettuce with a squeeze of lemon for dessert. And it was a sacrifice I was glad to make because I loved my kids, but was it true? I mean, I didn't know I was having that thought, that belief, that I would have to eat nothing and have no enjoyment in life if I wanted to be hot and sexy. That was a belief. But it wasn't true. It wasn't like I walked around aware of this belief inside me. When I recognized that belief, when it pulled itself to the surface as just a thought or just one possibility of endless possibilities, I could feel that belief leave every cell of my body. It was epic. And soon I was wearing a size I never thought I could see. I still remember the first time I drove to Old Navy to see what size I had shrunk to. And I was dizzy in the dressing room. All because of a belief. Unpause again and pause again. Notice the sensations 150 pounds brings up in you. And know that those feelings have something to say, whether that's, I could not possibly handle that, or whether that's way beyond my ability. Just be with those. That feeling, those sensations may be pointing to a belief. And if that belief serves you, then keep it. Let it live in you as a welcomed guest rather than something that's just running the show. Be aware of it. If it does not serve you, see it simply as a belief with no form or power. And helping people see and reprogram these kinds of beliefs is what I do. It's one of my passions. Just being able to observe it can change everything. But seeing these patterns is mindfulness. Mindfulness is a practice. And as we get better and better, our reward is both physiological and psychological. And the reward is profound. William Shakespeare is quoted as saying, "Nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so." The point he is making is that our thought process is full of our beliefs and our experiences, our own unique mental body. Bringing it into balance or into a supportive role is all about awareness. The body's automatic response isn't always the same as the thinking response. There are 2 distinct areas that I want to take note of that produce a dump of those negative hormones we talked about. The first is trauma. The second is shame. So pretty much a large amount of stress chemicals get dumped into the system when the brain has detected something that resembles a past trauma. Traumas are hard lessons we learned, and we will never need to learn them again. They are burned in our brains, and they hurt in some way. There's a difference between a traumatic experience and the trauma that lives inside our bodies because of that traumatic experience. Traumatic experiences can be as simple as a look from someone or as catastrophic as you can imagine. When stress hormones flood the system, processes like digestion slows down and breathing and heartbeat speeds up in order to have the most energy available for a fight, a flight, a freeze, or an appease response. The decision as to which one the body will choose is automatic. There's not a thought process weighing the pros and cons. In fact, that logical part of our brain is shut down during a traumatic experience when trauma is being created. And so all the emotion and all the expansive thoughts can be utilized in that moment in order to get out of it. So these responses, a fight response may look like a snarky comment all the way up to a fist fight. A flight may look like checking out with food or substances or getting lost on the internet or binge watching Netflix, or it can literally be running away from the scene at hand, actually removing your body from the situation. A freeze may simply be turning silent, or more complicated frozen in time response. And this last response, appease, I think it's more common for women, and it's something we don't talk about all the time. And it's this appease response. And appease will look something like peacemaking, avoiding conflict, agreeing, not having the ability to say no, or serving others, just being super nice. It's a valid way of surviving. When any of these show up, it is important to take your awareness first to your body, your physical body, and notice what sensations are happening and where. Then get curious about what you are thinking and the emotions you are feeling, observing the thoughts and feelings. Simply observing the situation is really the most helpful action to take, and working with someone really helps to put patterns together, and it helps you to get to the root of the trauma when someone else is there guiding you. Most of the time, this root sits under the surface in the subconscious. Shame is another stress hormone frenzy. We get a dump of it during shame. Shame could be the result of a trauma, and it probably is in some way, but I separated it out because what causes shame is usually more generalized in the population. We all kind of can understand that, whereas trauma can be very individual. What's traumatic for one person may not be traumatic for the next. Shame can produce the same trauma responses, but thoughts and beliefs are usually at the center stage instead of a past experience. Shame doesn't happen without the belief that one deserves it. According to Brené Brown's research, men's top shame trigger is being anything but tough. Do not be weak, or at least be better than someone else. Money, status, and power are the measuring sticks for men. Women's top trigger shame is, not surprisingly, how we look. Looking good takes up a lot of time and a lot of our attention and a lot of money. A woman can see a reflection of herself and come up with all the flaws in no time flat. Ladies, just pausing here again. All women see their flaws. They see them in themselves, and they see your perfections, no matter what you believe. Every woman sees their flaws first. Maybe we need some healing so that no longer happens. But for both men and women, even the slightest hint of not being enough in these areas can cause that rush of stress hormones, and they flood the body and they can send us into trauma. Side note, women need a little compassion. It's very normalized for people to outwardly comment on a woman's appearance at any time. There are huge industries created around this concept. But imagine if there were magazines, websites, places to go, all for the sole purpose of looking at a men's net worth, or imagine if it was normal for people to just want to know how much money you have in your wallet or see how much money you made or how much money's in your wallet or in your bank account. And that was just normalized, that you could just ask somebody that and you could judge them on it. Innocent catcalling and not so innocent pornography, they hit us women in that most vulnerable spot, right where it hurts. These things, they are at our most vulnerable shame trigger. And maybe, to be honest, we women can be a little more discreet when we wish we had more of something around our guys, where we're wishing that they made more money or they could at least take it that way. When we covet our neighbors, whatever, the men in our lives may hear this as judgment of who they are or as criticism of their worth instead of just our imagination at work. It would hit them in the same way as insulting our looks would for us. Shame doesn't need as much curiosity. When shame shows up, we need empathy. We need to speak our shame to a trusted person, and this is the work that Brené Brown has been championing. As a society, we have gotten the idea that we must hide our shame. It is the opposite. This mistake is costing us our ability to be whole and to feel like we are loved and that we belong. These are not so much emotions, as you can see, as they are this mental belief, thoughts and beliefs about ourselves, this function of the mental body. And the mental body is an important tool to help us investigate and reprogram our trauma and our shame. Don't assign mental body things to mind over matter or thinking and growing rich or it's all in your mind. They might be great things and useful in their place, but it's so important to learn about all the four bodies within us, and the mental body, the emotional body, the spiritual body, as well as the physical body, because each of these play a different role in our experiencing of our life. Two people can have the same life experiences and have very different emotions tied to that experience. Two people can hear the same word and have very different sensations arise within their body. And when we start to separate out our thoughts and feelings, our emotions, and the meaning and connection that are important to us, our world becomes a lot safer. We feel better. When we begin to understand ourselves, the world is more predictable and it feels more stable. Too much of our unconscious mind is spent preparing for another shoe to drop or preventing us from being found out. The work of this life is as much about learning to receive and hold the greatness of who we are, those beliefs, as it is learning to give to others. This mental process of our thoughts and beliefs about ourselves is really a lot about what we're here to do. One of the ways we do this is to examine the thoughts that rule our lives, both good and bad, becoming aware. Many times the negative thoughts are not our own either, but they're actually beliefs in someone else's thoughts that we have agreed to. Leonardo da Vinci has said, all of our knowledge has its origins in our perceptions. Everything comes through perceptions. When we examine these thoughts and beliefs, or perceptions, as Da Vinci calls them, they can be shifted toward more supportive ones. And when we examine our good thoughts, they can begin to grow and expand. So win-win when we start to look at this mental process within ourselves. On to the movie review. In the movie, A Beautiful Mind, the main character, a real man, a true story, John Nash, said, "The only thing greater than the power of the mind is the courage of the heart." And I want to talk about this movie. So if you've seen it or haven't seen it, I should say, pause, spoiler alert ahead. Just warning you. It's a great movie. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. I remember seeing it in the theater and then sitting in the theater parking lot after the movie for almost an hour talking about it with my husband. At that time, schizophrenia was something I was not familiar with at all. I don't know, though, just this movie changed the way I looked at mental illness. It changed me in ways I cannot even articulate. I would say my love for this movie, A Beautiful Mind, can be defined in one word: paradox. I love when things seem opposite and then they kind of find their way to come together as one. And his mind, his beautiful mind, is very much a paradox. The mental process of John Nash was both genius and incompetent. Without both, we would probably never even know his name. He was afraid of his own mind, but used the fear of losing the love of his life to overcome his loss and gain something better, even though that better was the opposite of what he thought he wanted. John Nash used the very thing that was his vice to create his virtue. He used his thinking to question his thoughts. He used his logic and creativity to stay in reality. The 2001 movie is based on the life of the American mathematician John Nash. He was a Nobel laureate in economics and a Nobel Prize winner. The film stars Russell Crowe along with Ed Harris, Jennifer Connelly, and Paul Bettany, also known as Vision to the fans of the Avengers, which, by the way, I loved the series WandaVision on Disney+. You got to catch that. It also has Adam Goldberg, Judd Hirsch, and Christopher Plummer, who's famous for The Sound of Music. A Beautiful Mind won 4 Academy Awards for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Supporting Actress for Jennifer Connelly. She certainly deserved that award. The film begins in Nash's day as a graduate student at Princeton University. In real life, John Nash was raised by 2 highly educated parents, and his father was known to give him mathematics books to read when he was far too young to understand them. He was always considered a different sort of kid, and the movie lets us know that he is socially awkward. But you get the idea that he would really like to fit in. But he is very much a square peg in school and in social situations and in life. John doesn't attend his classes. Instead, his goal is to come up with an original idea that propels him into the best of the best. Probably like the equation E = mc squared did for Albert Einstein, which incidentally, both Nash and Einstein were at Princeton University at the same time, and the real John Nash shared later in life that he and Einstein had spoken once. John shared some of his thoughts about gravity and the expansion of the universe, and then John claimed he saw some famous theoretical physicists using those theories, the ones that were similar to his, so that's kind of funny. Later on in the movie, there was this pivotal scene where he and some fellow students are in a bar, and a group of girls walks in, and you have to watch the movie to kind of get the full picture. They did a great job. But this is the moment where his original idea was born, and it's known today as game theory. Game theory is the process of modeling the strategic interaction between 2 or more players in a situation containing a set of rules and outcomes. Thank you, Google. Although it's used in a number of disciplines, game theory is most notably used as a tool within the study of economics. In the words of John himself, he says, "The best for the group comes when everyone in the group does what's best for himself and for the group." It seems strange. This is the theory, and it seems strange that this was such a revolutionary idea. It's so simple. But really, we have not, as a society, taken to heart this mathematically correct approach and put it fully into our psyche and fully used it. Isn't it amazing to think that oneness and unity in prosperity can actually be mathematically proven? To take the best source of action for all might push up against our egos. This idea seems to go against our free market spirit here in the US. But just in case you need to hear it again, quote, "The best for the group comes when everyone in the group does what's best for himself and the group." This is a mathematical truth, and I think it's amazing. This is how the mental body looks at life and processes things in balance and wholeness. It loves logic and reason, and it remembers and it understands, and it looks for answers and creates expansive ideas. The mental body is itself a paradox. best for itself and others, balanced and whole. With John Nash's original idea, he has this free ticket to go anywhere within his field, and he chooses to go to MIT and teach and research. In real life, he is a difficult professor. He taught way beyond his students' capabilities and then judged them harshly when they didn't keep up with him. It is here he meets his future wife, Alicia, and the movie depicts a most romantic courtship. The movie shows us that it was Alicia that breaks down his awkward walls and makes him more of a caring and loving person, maybe for the first time in his life. So it's really heartbreaking when soon after they're married, John's schizophrenia comes to a head and the whole first half of the movie is called into question. The movie is genius and amazing at sending you on a roller coaster ride of questioning reality in probably the same way the characters do in the movie. You're not quite sure what's happening or what's real. And then the film brings you to tears as Alicia is forced to agree to horrible insulin shock therapy used at the time to induce a comatose state. You also cry at how the effects of the treatment and the medication affect their once beautiful romance. It makes you see how life would be married to someone whose mind cannot be trusted. We get a glimpse at the paranoia it must have caused her, but also how difficult it would be to have your loved ones not trust your thinking. John decides in the movie to stop his medication because he's really never convinced that some of his closest allies in life were imaginary. The illusions return rather quickly, and it's only when Alicia sees how dangerous these illusions can be and tries to leave that John finds the flaw in his illusion. His thinking, his logic, his creativity come online, and he deciphers the difference between reality and non-reality. In real life, this limbo-like state of John coming to grips with his illness takes years, and actually, John and Alicia divorced about 6 years after they married. But in 1970, Alicia took pity on John and allowed him to move into her home as a boarder. But then in 2001, they remarried. One might call them soulmates for sure. In 2015, both of them were killed in a vehicle accident, sadly, on their way home from the airport after visiting Norway, where Nash had received the Abel Prize. Neither of them had to live without the other, and they seem to be just this perfect couple, two sides of the same coin, so it's a little poetic that they passed away at the same time. The film depicts Alicia's strength and compassion as she supports John's decision to treat himself in his own way. She has to surrender to the truth of how life is rather than the way she must have believed it would be. Instead of a large, important career, John goes back to Princeton, and with the help of his colleagues, he carves out an existence there. He thanks Alicia and credits her for his life and the ability to accept the Nobel Prize in 1994. Remember, they weren't married at this time, but they had this deep connection. And in the movie, there's a point where he's worried about what reality is, and she puts his hand on her heart, and she says, "This is what's real." It's a touching scene. For this man, though, a mathematician whose desire was to find answers to the whys in life and to make sense of the world that he never really understood. In fact, there's a funny scene where John is trying to come up with that equation, that new idea, and he's trying to come up with equations for everything from how pigeons move to why someone would get mugged. He really wanted to figure out the world, make it understandable, make it fit into an equation, and how paradoxical it was that none of that was reality really for him. And yet, because of him, he changed big parts of economics and math. Math was his pathway to understanding how and why in a world of paradox, where how has a million answers and why another million. But even he eventually accepts this unknown, this trust. He surrenders to the mental body, which is how he thinks rather than what he thinks. He observes himself rather than trying to figure out the world. My favorite quote of his is where he asks, "What truly is logic? What decides reason?" And then he says, "It is only in the mysterious equations of love that any logic or reason can be found." And I could not agree more. Certainty only lies, without exception, in uncertainty. Our mind is a paradox. We must become aware of our thinking and our beliefs, show them empathy and love, and then find peace. We invite you to the wholenessnetwork.com, where you'll find the Wholeness Library. Inside, you'll find tutorials, downloads, mini classes, and all sorts of streaming content for you on your wholeness journey.